6,000 of the people who were working alongside people with disabilities in those unregistered providers had gone through worker screening.
Wow. The NDIS system to help them navigate where are the mainstream supports and the foundation and the NDIS support if necessary.
The hybrid model has great potential, and I think it actually may have been what the original intent of the NDIS was supposed to be. It's time for Australia to start looking at some of the differences that we have in our states and territories. You should be able to move from one system into the next seamlessly.
Are we there yet on this journey to be an inclusive and fair Australia?
We're not. We aren't there yet.
Before we get started, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode of our cutting-edge contemporary conversations. Thank you. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Dev. Nice to be here.
Good to chat with you today. Before, I think there are so many things happening in the sector, leading from the Royal Commission to the NDIS review. But before we delve into the more nitty-gritties of the recommendations on Royal Commission and the NDIS review, could you just give a brief overview of your landing in disability sector and the transformation work you have done, during your multiple roles?
Well, Dev, look, it's a lifetime of involvement with disability. Growing up with a sister with a disability, so I guess my involvement started when my younger sister was born, and I progressed into education through to curriculum development, etc., in New Zealand and in Australia. Working in Indonesia with the education system there for students with disabilities, and have had 3 businesses, and my last role was CEO of a disability service provider here in Western Australia. I was there for 14 years, terrific time, and during that there was incredible change, and not the least of which was the transition into the NDIS. And I guess we went from being a very small organisation to being quite a large organisation across the southwest and Perth metro area, including Peel, and we expanded into the allied health area. So it was terrific to be able to experience the growth of an organisation, but also just to be able to work alongside people as we transitioned into this new ecosystem of the NDIS.
Lovely. Give briefly your overview on the Royal Commission. 4.5 years of work happened there, and what are the main recommendations which touch home with you, and what do you see how these recommendations coming into action?
Gosh, I might start by saying that we've had the Royal Commission and the NDIS review, and look, it's terrific that we've had them. I'm feeling that there's been enough reviewing now and enough talking that I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking that it's time for some action. The Royal Commission was certainly needed. It was again reactionary, and I think that's one of the things that maybe we need to be moving into a more proactive stance. But nonetheless, the Royal Commission's come through in terms of quality and safeguards. I think there have been certainly some improvements in that area. And I think that the regulatory frameworks are being looked at. I think there's certainly a greater focus on what, if you're a service provider or whoever, if you're working alongside a person with a disability, that you are doing the right thing, that you are providing quality, but also you're being led and guided by the participant. I think that out of the Royal Commission, we've certainly got greater focus on safety and the safeguards that are being put in place, have been put in place.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. And within the Royal Commission, one of the things they talked about the human rights approach and the Disability Rights Act. And your views on that, and how does that directly correlate, linking it to what came out of NDIS review as well?
I think it was about time that Australia caught up with other countries in terms of having it as a human right. And I think along with that, there's a little more strength in terms of getting things done and having things available. And I think that in terms of the NDIS review and some of the recommendations there, beginning to look at legislation and getting it into the legislation so it becomes law, I think that that's actually a positive move.
For the last 1 year, when the NDIS review was appointed, there are multiple papers which have been published leading up to the review, and post the publication of the NDIS review in December, there are a lot of conversations happening across the sector. What do you think are the key messages coming out of the NDIS review one, and which one of the implementation or recommendations would you want to talk about?
Gosh, I think there are a few really key things. One is the enshrining it in law. So I really like the idea of that. I rather like the idea of there being I'm trying to think of the name of it, the NDIS Supports Commission.
Yeah.
And that commission being given more power, more opportunity to guide and regulate within the system. I think that the regulatory system itself absolutely needs to be addressed. I think and the review it has addressed this, and I understand that task force that's being headed by, is it Natalie Wade? It's one of the first things that they're going to be looking at. I think that there is an imbalance at the moment in terms of the regulatory system, in terms of whether you're a provider registered or not, and what sort of, I guess, system you have to adhere to. I was reading somewhere that there's a notion of there being 4 levels, going. I can't remember the 4 levels. It was, I think one was general, basic, network, and I think the first one might have been advanced, and that was determined with regards to who were the people that you were primarily working alongside, and what was their level of need, and that had a flavour of quality and safeguards, which I really liked. But I also think that within the system at the moment, whether you're a large provider or a sole operator, and you're wanting to be registered, you're having to adhere to and go through the same audit processes. And I think that that's very unfair. It's unnecessary. So there's that element. I think looking at staffing and who is working alongside people with disabilities in our communities. And I think that absolutely we need to have one system across the country that, the worker screening is that it's quicker to apply for it, that it's transportable, so that you can move from one jurisdiction to another. I think that I was surprised to read that of the 150,000 odd registered providers, unregistered providers. Thanks, Steve. Yes, unregistered providers. Yeah, really important. Only about 6,000 of the people who were working alongside people with disabilities in those unregistered providers had gone through worker screening.
Wow.
So I feel that's indicating that there's opportunity for, I'm not saying that that everyone's going to be doing the wrong thing. Not by no stretch. However, that's an awful large number of people who may not be the best people to be working alongside people with disabilities. And I understand that it was reported that there had been some people who had they'd gone to become an unregistered provider because they could not get worker screening. So I think that's not good.
And the NDIS review talks about the multiple layers, 3 support levels, the mainstream supports, the foundation supports, and the NDIS supports. And then the critical layer, the mid layer, the assumption here is the foundation support will supplement a lot of funding which would be delivered through multiple state and territory governments. As we see from a nationalized funding model to a state-run, and then this is a hybrid model rather than a nationalized model. A part of the the NDIS support is a nationalized, foundation supports is a state-based, and the mainstream majority of them are state-based. So how does this hybrid model works, and then what are the intersection, and how does that play long-term?
Oh, blimey, that's a biggie. I think the hybrid model has great potential, and I think it actually may have been what the original intent of the NDIS was supposed to be, that we would have a system where we would have a Commonwealth-run system, but then we would have the states and territories being partners in the system to be able to provide supports to people who were not necessarily eligible for the NDIS itself. So I think it's one of the areas that's going to be really interesting to watch as the states and territories negotiate, come to an understanding as to, so often it comes back to dollars. So how much are the states and territories willing to pick up and then to support? I like it because it resonates with the West Australian system, I guess, prior to the NDIS, where we had, a better relationship between Commonwealth and states. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of that.
And then leading from there, 11 years ago, the broad promise of NDIS was, a young child born in New South Wales, and if the child grows up and then midway they want to move to a different state, probably Queensland, the supports he or she would receive in both the states will be similar, and it'll be a nationalized system. It won't be a multiple layered system. And if we talk about specifically on the the foundation supports from an angle of Department of Education delivered for young kids with developmental disabilities or developmental challenges, how do we make sure that every state and territory Department of Education deliver the funding with a similar promise, with a similar the lay of the land? And then, mind you, one of the Royal Commission recommendation was, some states should look forward to having, they were divided on mainstream schools or mainstream and special ed schools. So keeping all of that in mind, what do you see the delivery of foundation supports to, every state and territory Department of Education?
I think, again, this is another big one. And I think that it's time for Australia to start looking at some of the differences that we have in our states and territories, and education is one of the biggies. Whether you have a disability or not, you ought to be able to move, and we are a reasonably transient population. We do move from state to state or state to territory. That you should be able to move from one system into the next seamlessly. And whether that's a student with a disability or not, you should be able to have the same expectation of supports that you would get that, or that you got previously, and that you shouldn't have to go through any further assessments or anything like that. It should just be picked up. You should move smoothly. You should transition into the next state or territory.
Lovely. The language which been used in the opening section of the Royal Commission report and the NDIS review is the vision of inclusive and fair Australia, and then that vision, the assumption of that vision will be delivered by all mainstream supports as well. That all our mainstream supports should be inclusive and fair. So where does that promise land from every state and territory government departments, whether it's Department of Justice, Health, Transport, and so forth?
Where does it land? Yes, it's probably landing at the moment onto the table where they're going to have to assess where the differences are and how to level the playing field. They need to be able to understand what the difference is, and then to see, well, where can they come to a point where it is we can have seamless transition, whether that's and it doesn't matter which jurisdiction it is, whether it's education, health, whatever. It'll be nice to be able to just have Australia. It's almost like I'm not going to say it, but to have a unified Australia. And if we can have that via inclusion, then I think that's going to benefit everybody.
I would assume so. There would be a large amount of infrastructure cost across all state and territories to be implemented in the coming 5 years to deliver that vision, and which sits outside the NDIS supports, which typically sits within the state and territory budgets, and then these projects could be sitting in the current, strategic plans of other departments. But how do you have a linearity and conformity across? So there's a big cost on delivering that linearity and then unified support ecosystem.
Well, I think you need to come back again to truly understanding what the need is, but it's also around stopping this trying to transfer responsibility, trying to transfer budget responsibility between states and territories, between the states, territories and the Commonwealth. So they're going to have to work out, well, who's paying for what, and then I dare say that each state and territory will come in at a different level, depending on their own individual budgets and what their particular systems look like. So there's going to be a lot of work required to understand what those different systems are, and I really hope that it's not going to take them a long time, that they don't get, the process doesn't get caught up in more reference groups that will go on, and I think we need to have some action. There needs to be some understanding, some idea of an imperative to actually get this all sorted by a particular time. And I understand, we've got this, I think Mr. Shorten's been talking about 5 years for the implementation of that's the NDIS review.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of thinking, oh gosh, we're already 10, 11 years into this NDIS. Now we're going to be what? By the time we get to this end point, it's going to be 15, 16 years. Can't we move a little bit quicker?
I want to talk specifically on the home and living part of the NDIS review recommendations and broadly DRC as well. There are different settings for different people. There are people who would be living in a 24/7 care, a one-to-one STA, high physical needs kind of a housing, and there are people who are living in a shared living arrangements, which vary from 1 to 3 to 1 to 6, and probably more. And then and they're so-called group homes in the system. And we've been talking about through multiple papers, and it's been thrown out that 1-to-3 ratio will work very well in some way. What do you feel about looking for one number as 1-to-3, or what is a good solution on housing within the NDIS ecosystem? And broadly, it also talks about the state and territory governments have stock of housing, and they have old stock of SDA housing, which could be repurposed and around those things. So how does that come into play, all of these things? Keeping that in mind, we would have some stock in the state. And how does state governments take control on these things?
Gosh, the home and living area is an area that I really get excited about. I think it is an area that we can do so much in, that a lot has been done and we can learn from that, but there's a lot more that we can do. And it's such an important aspect of someone's life, where you live, and what choice do you get in terms of where you might live and who you might live with. So, and we started off with with the institutions, and then I guess we progressed into the group homes, and now we've moved into independent living. Moved into those situations where we might have a couple of people, 3 people, choosing to live together, and the supports that are around them that enable them to live a good life. I think that the states and territories, certainly in terms of the availability of housing, we're told, we know it's an issue across the country, not just for people with disabilities. There's also things like in the rural and remote areas, we know that there are challenges trying to find accommodation for the staff who might be required to work alongside the person with a disability. So it's multifaceted. And I think that it's certainly going to require government departments who have responsibilities for housing to be sitting at the table. I think there are providers who will be wanting to sit at the table. And then we've got the SDA environment, which is this, it feels like it's quite a growing environment, the number of houses coming online. And you talked about the ratio of 3 people. Before that was put on the table, so to speak, I had been having some conversations with people, and I seem to recollect, I may be wrong, but 3 was for the funding, that was some sort of sweet number. Now, I'm sure there's lots of economics around all of this. Whatever system we have, one, it's got to be, for the people with disabilities, it's got to be a really nice environment, one that they've got some choice and control over, that they're not having to have necessarily meals at the same time, and everyone gets up at the same time, and you don't have choice about what you get to eat, etc., or where you want to live. There's some sort of balancing of that with, these things do cost. They do have there's a monetary cost to all of this. So you have to be able to fund that as well. So yes, there's going to be a bit of work involved, but I do hope that there's enough evidence probably already out there in terms of different models, different ways of being able to set this home and living up that works for everybody.
And also the NDIS review talks about the leadership position the state and territory governments should take in specific markets where there are not many providers, to create the infrastructures to deliver, whether it's housing or therapy services, or provider of last resort from that format. So how do you see that playing out within different, because Australia, from a geography point of view, is very vast, and every state has a different topographical or demographical and geographical challenges as well.
Again, so many of these, the questions that are being posed at the moment, it is, yes, you've got to look at Australia's big, it's very different in terms of the infrastructure that's available, the people, the whole range of things. And we know in Western Australia, you know, the challenges that there are in the, you know, the Pilbara, the Kimberley, even sometimes out beyond Perth, when you get out into the wheat fields, down south, there are challenges. How they get addressed, I certainly think we come to the pricing, and they're talking about that not being, you know, one price that fits all. They're going to have to look at there being greater variation. And I think in terms of the provider, you know, we talked about the provider of last resort. I think sometimes it needs to be there. It would be nice if we had a system where it wasn't required. So maybe that's the aim, that we actually work towards a system that doesn't require a provider of last resort, that our system is so robust and it's able to accommodate the needs of people in our community, no matter where you live, whether you're in a metro, you know, Perth, Melbourne, whatever, or you're out in Balga in the Kimberley.
There's a new role which has been created, the navigator role, which typically which will support all people with disabilities, whether they are within the NDIS system or outside the NDIS system, to help them navigate where are the mainstream supports and the foundation and the NDIS support if necessary. And so there are multiple, you know, broad conversations around, you know, one is how do you identify that larger workforce, and with that larger skill set or broader skill set to understand this person should know how to navigate through multiple systems, you know, from a federal systems to state-based systems, whether there's the housing system or the health or Centrelink. So there are many things to be managed by one person. So it's a very broader skill set to be coming on the table as a navigator. And how do you see the workforce evolving to pick up those skills, and where do you see broad gaps?
Gosh. I think the navigator role that's being talked about potentially will be a key, if it's done right, could be a key position to be able to assist the person with a disability, their carers, family, etc., work through the system. But also once you're coming into the system, once you're there, being able to understand maybe some of the changes that might be required. I think it's going to be from a workforce perspective. I hope that whoever it is that's going to, if it's going to be within the NDIA, that there's a training budget going to be set up. I hope that we've got the people out there that are keen to be able to get involved in that. I think it's going to be one that's going to be really interesting to see how it rolls out. The name itself, Navigator, that's it's okay. So as long as they are navigating, it does, maybe in some respects it says, oh, someone actually doesn't know where they're going. But I'd like to think that it's not the person with the disability not knowing where they're going. It's maybe the person with the disability and or their family, their network, is unsure about what some of the options are that might be available to them. And I think that if the navigator role is doing that, then I think that could be really very beneficial. And I think it gets away, there's been discussion, talk about conflict of interest, and I think that that the navigator role, if it's taken away from providers, I think there's opportunities there for a less conflicted position to be in.
That's my concluding question on the conversation around earlier. We said, the language of, the country has to be, inclusive and more fair. And in our journey to that, to be an inclusive and fair Australia, and the colloquial term in Australia we use, are we there yet? So my question to you is, are we there yet on this journey to be an inclusive and fair Australia?
I love the "are we there yet?" because we can all, well, many of us will, it will resonate. And I think that, look, if we go and we see ourselves as we're all in the car and the journey has started, are we there yet? No, we're not. We aren't there yet. Just in our conversation that we've been having, we've got lots and lots of questions. There are a staggering number of questions that we're yet to have answers to. So when we start getting the answers, I think we'll start getting closer to our destination. Will we ever really get there? I hope that that this is going to be a process of continuous improvement, that it will never actually stop. We won't stop looking at what we do as a society, as a community, that inclusion is very multifaceted, that it goes across a range of areas, that I hope that we continue to look at ourselves and what we're doing and build on the good stuff that we've been doing. And we don't forget that we've got a history and we've got lots of learning and we've got a wealth of knowledge and understanding out there. Let's harness that and get on with the job. And if we can maybe have a few, maybe fewer of these of reviews and committees and things, and actually start looking at the actions, then we're going to be much, much closer to there. Bit of a long-winded approach, but it's a long journey, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob.
Dev, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.